Hi, my name is Shelby Hinte, and I'm a writer, editor. By day, I'm a data specialist, and by night, I'm a teacher. And my work in progress is currently titled Howling Women.
I met Shelby through a Chloe Caldwell workshop this spring, so we didn't really know each other going into this, but it was so much fun getting to know Shelby and getting a little window into her mind through this interview.
So I did a whole rewrite of the book with that kind of in my head, like sound like yourself, sound like your writing voice, and then fix these problems. And it was a really fun experience. It was really cool to go through. And so now I just finished a draft last week, and I'm actually swapping with 2 other writers this week. The experience was so fun that I would like to think if you're having that much fun writing, like it's not totally terrible.
Oh yeah, writing's supposed to be fun. There are so many priceless little takeaways just like that in this interview. Shelby's also going to read an excerpt from her work in progress, Howling Women. Plus, we end the episode with an all-new edition of Prompt Me Daddy, so make sure you stick around to the end to get a lesson from Shelby. All that and more in today's episode.
There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books. So before we get into Shelby's work in progress, let's get to know her. You're the first work in progress that I don't intimately know, that I haven't worked on their thing with. So I'm excited to get to know you first, and then we can kind of hop into where you're at with your work in progress. So let's do the lightning round. So I fully sprung this lightning round on Shelby, so let the record show that she did not get to prepare for this, but I loved getting to know her through these answers. When did you first identify as a writer?
I don't know if I yet identify as a writer. I always have pretty serious imposter syndrome with writing and teaching, but I write pretty much every day, so I'm getting better at just saying now, I guess.
But you did an MFA, right? That wasn't oh, I'm a writer. That was I'm just studying.
Yeah, I sort of feel like it's, the metaphorical bone attached to my head that I'm chasing. I keep thinking, oh, once I publish this or I accomplish this, then I'll feel like a writer. And lately I'm realizing maybe that's never going to happen. So I just have to say it, since it's the thing that takes up probably the most time in my day.
Yeah. Okay. What's your all-time favorite book?
So that's a really hard question. I was trying to think about it because I got your email right before hopping on this call.
I know. I try to give people more warning, but I was I want to get to know her a little bit.
No, I like that there isn't.
You can cheat and do a couple.
No, I like that there wasn't a lot of warning, but I was thinking about maybe the book I come back to the most or think about the most, which is probably, this is going to sound so douchey, but it's the book that's in my brain a lot, and it's The Unnameable by Samuel Beckett. And I think maybe because it has a lot of my favorite sort of existential lines, including the last line of the book is something like, you can't go on, you must go on, I go on, or something like that. And I feel like that's almost like a refrain in my brain for the last decade.
Oh, nice. Samuel Beckett. Wow. Okay. What's your dream writing routine if you could pick?
Well, I probably live in a really remote house in the woods and wake up early before my family, probably 4:30 or 5, and then read, meditate, write for a few hours, go and do some form of exercise, and then come back and write for a few more hours, and then be done well before dinner and just kind of zone out and hang out.
Yeah, that sounds nice. What's your real writing routine?
My real writing routine is kind of an early morning thing. I try sort of desperately to wake up at 5 a.m. and then end up getting up at 5:30 or sometimes 6 a.m., which leads to everything basically being shorter than I intended. So I wake up, I do a very short reading, a 10, 15-minute meditation, and then I try and write for ideally 2 hours, but it normally ends up being more like an hour to an hour and a half. And then I work out and I like rush to do my day job.
Okay, so you're like halfway there to your dream writing routine. Do you plan what you're going to work on during that time in advance, or do you just like let the spirit move you?
Totally. Yeah. If I'm between projects, I feel like I'm so flailing, but I normally have some type of project I'm working on and I like to map it out the week before. And usually I didn't get as far as I thought I would the day before. So I'm normally catching up with whatever I didn't do. But yeah, I definitely need a plan. I'm a real planner.
Yeah, I'm finding I think I do too. What's one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it?
Probably like a million pieces. I love feeling jealous of other writers. But I think I tend to be really jealous of writers who do something super different than me. And a piece that came to mind, and it's one I teach a lot too, is by Carmen Maria Machado. And it's called Help Me Follow My Sister into the Land of the Dead. And it's this story that came out, I think it was on Lightspeed magazine. It's like an online lit journal, but it's written as a GoFundMe sort of. And I just thought it was like so clever and it's really funny, but also totally depressing, which is my favorite genre.
I love that. I'm going to have to read that. Okay. So before we get into the work in progress, let's talk MFAs for a second. You got your MFA from, well, I'll let you explain.
Totally. Yeah. I just went to a state school. So I went to San Francisco State. I have a step kid that is with me 50% of the week. So I couldn't go very far. So I applied to like 5 grad schools that were local. And then a friend who had done a very expensive program, she said, go where the money is. And so I just went to SF State because they paid for it. And so that was ideal. And I just had to cross a bridge to get there.
Nice. Okay. And you studied fiction. So are you yay or nay on the MFA experience, kind of pros and cons? And would you recommend it to, say, me or another listener?
Totally. I think so. I kind of go back and forth. I started my MFA thinking that I wanted to teach in academia, like at universities, which I definitely don't want to do. I mean, sorry, maybe I do want to do it, but it's not my ideal.
Put that soundbite on your resume.
Yeah, I don't want this job. No, I think for me, I really wanted some deadlines and I wanted, like, it was free feedback, you know? I didn't have to pay tuition. There were people who were way smarter than me with way more experience. And I kind of, because I was their student, trapped them into a corner of reading my work and giving me feedback. And I made a lot of really close friends who are now part of my writing group. So I recommend it for that, but I think that there's for sure alternatives. And at the time I was teaching high school, and so I had a real benefit of it really increased my pay by a good amount. So I had like pretty instant monetary bonuses from being like in a master's program and getting those credit hours. But if I didn't need it for work, and now that I'm not so like in love with the idea of teaching at a college, I think you can get writing community from, you know, doing stuff like what you're doing, podcasting and meeting others.
Or even like workshops. And yeah,
totally.
I read your thing in rejection letters, like literary criticism or how I get paid nothing to use my degree and talk shit. I was like, this will be an interesting answer.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that. Yeah, that's a silly poem.
Okay, so let's get into the work in progress. Explain the title, working title, premise.
Yeah, so the working title is Howling Women. And it's been the title pretty much since I started the project. You know, the little pitch is, you know, it's a story of this 30-year-old woman named Sabine, who's sort of like an alcohol-loving, sex-obsessed millennial who ends up running away to the desert after she blows up her marriage and life in California. And she ends up bartending there, sort of avoiding her problems, and quickly finds herself in some dangerous situations that gets her arrested. And the novel picks up after she's been released from jail and put on probation and has to attend mandatory substance abuse therapy. And it's the suggestion of her therapist that she work through her shit. And her therapist suggests she try writing it all down. And so the book is sort of structured like a meta-fictional confessional that's like kind of her testimony, figuring out how she ended up getting arrested and all the events that led to that. So it did not begin in that way. But yeah, I started in 2017 while I was in grad school. I wanted to finish a book while I was there so that I could get feedback from professors and peers while I had the opportunity. And I had a couple ideas. I had started and like not finished a lot of novels before entering grad school. And so I had this idea that I kept coming back to. Really was like a voice. It was like this voice of this character. And I was like, kind of based on some situations that I had been through. And I was sort of, my starting point was a question of what if I had really fucked up? And I wanted to kind of follow that line of thought and see what happened if the situations I had been had sort of exploded way more. And so I followed that. I gave myself a timeline. It was December, winter break. And I said, if I am interested in writing this after I've written 1,000 words a day for like 30 days, then this is a book. And it's not going to be one of those books I've abandoned. And by the time January hit, 2018, I was like, had way more questions and was way more interested in the idea than when I started. So I was like, okay, like, I guess I'm not totally bored with this and I'm going to go with it. And that's kind of been my metric for whether or not I should keep writing it over the last couple years is, am I still curious? Like, is there still more I want to know with this revision?
How many drafts have you written and have you queried it at all? Like, where are you at in terms of publishing?
Okay, so I feel like it's been through a million drafts. But so I'm a big rewriter. I normally start from the beginning and rewrite. And so I think by 2019, when I was graduating, I had a decent-ish draft that felt mostly finished that I turned in for my thesis. And then I took the summer off after grad school and just like wrote a bunch of dumb stuff, hung out with my family, worked a lot, tried to make money. And then I spent the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020 going back and I'm saying, I'm going to give this book a real ending. I'm going to shape it up. And then the pandemic hit right around the time that I was ready to query. So I slowed down and I gave it one more rewrite. And then sometime in like the summer of 2020, I started querying. And that was a kind of wild ride. I got maybe 15 or so requests for fulls. And so that was like super exciting. And then I got feedback from agents that ultimately rejected it that was mostly, I can never tell if it's like a euphemism or if it's honest, but the sort of overwhelming response was, I really like this, X, Y, and Z, but I don't know how to sell it, or I don't know how to debut an author with this book, or I don't know an editor to sell this to. And so I was like, kind of discouraged. So I spent
but those are logistical problems. You know what I mean? That's like finding the right fit. I don't know.
Yeah. And I felt though, I super hear that. It was kind of maybe like just the right amount of encouragement to keep going, but also make me be full of self-doubt. But yeah, I needed a break, I think, by I guess 2021. I stopped querying. I did a full rewrite the summer of 2021 because I looked at what I kind of tracked some of the language of the responses from agents. And I did see a couple things that were maybe like, there seemed to maybe be a pacing issue, a word count issue. So I went through and I did another rewrite and I sent it to maybe 3 small presses, one of which I haven't heard back from yet, and 2 that it was just like a rejection. But then I spent all of 2021, all of the fall last year, writing the second draft of a different book. And then in January of this year, I was like, okay, I had finished the second draft of a different book. I had Howling Women, and I was like, I'm so sick of Howling Women. I'm so sick of rejection. I'm just going to do a next rewrite on this other book.
Let's name that one.
The working title is Modern Marriage, Love, and Other Drugs.
What is it, like essays or?
It's another novel, yeah.
Okay.
So January came, and I was like, I had, these 2 books, and I was like, do I really want to keep working on Howling Women? It feels like it's been forever. But then on a whim, I sent it to an editor who has kind of become a friend of mine. And she runs a press that I really love, but I didn't quite think my book was a fit for her. But she had put a post out. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. It's the first of the year. I'm just going to send this her way. And then she gave me some feedback that I feel like really like fucked with me. She was so encouraging. And basically she said like, this doesn't fit my press. Like this feels like a bigger press book. She said a lot of things I already knew when I sent it to her. But what she gave me was like serious encouragement. She was like, I really believe in this book. I really believe in you. And then she gave me like 3 like plot driven problems. She was like, fix this, this, and this, and send it back out. And I was like, whoa, this is like tangible stuff. Like I can get to the meat of this, but I wasn't ready. So I took a couple months off. And then I just spent the last 2 months in the meat of those problems she gave me. I feel like I needed to figure out in my own voice what the problem was, like, you know, with her feedback in mind.
Right, right.
And a funny thing happened. I was editing something else for probably just like a review or something. And I always ask my husband to read them before I send it off. And he read it and he goes, yeah, this is great, but make it sound like you and not someone else. And then he like, you know, mocked, like basically like said a sentence in my voice, which was like sort of horrifying and hilarious because he nailed it. But that was kind of like the last puzzle piece. So I had this other editor's voice in my head of like these 3 like pretty simple plot issues that I was like, I could figure out answers to these. And then I had my husband's voice in my head of like, sound more like you. And, you know, 4 years had passed and I was like, oh, like I've written so much more now than when I started. So I did a whole rewrite of the book with that kind of in my head, like sound like yourself, sound like your writing voice, and then fix these problems. And it was a really fun experience. It was really cool to go through. And so now I just finished a draft last week and I'm actually swapping with 2 other writers this week.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. So then hopefully a query again.
Do you feel like with all that in mind, use your voice and solve these problems like you did kind of crack it this time?
I hope so. I feel like there's no way of knowing, but I do feel good about it. And I also, the experience was so fun that I would like to think if you're having that much fun writing, like it's not totally terrible.
Yeah.
But we'll find out.
And then your game plan moving forward is like, you're going to swap with these writers and then go back out to the same people, to new people.
Probably a list of new people. I have 3 people in mind. And then I sort of have like, if I can't stomach the agent thing, I have a list of small presses that I really like respect and admire. And I might just hit them up. So I'm going to kind of just sit with it and see. I don't want to think about publishing. I'm really like, that part makes me so sick to my stomach. So I just like want to enjoy right now that like, I just had a really fun experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's super motivating though, because I'm like about to rewrite this thing that I've rewritten little pieces since I did the big draft, but I haven't rewritten the whole thing. And I think I have a little anxiety about it, but it's like, yeah, it can be fun.
Totally. And I think actually doing like interviewing other writers in here, and Chloe Caldwell was a person who said that like writing's supposed to be fun, remember?
Right.
And that really helps too. But are you working on a collection of essays or is it something different?
Yeah, I'm trying to like not finish. There are going to be so many more drafts, but I'm trying to finish the draft that I want to query with. And there are definitely some things that I know that are wrong, but it's just like jumping all the way back in for some reason. I don't know. It's just like getting in cold water or something. Yeah. I don't know. You're like, oh, gotta get comfortable.
Totally. You know, I think for me, part of it is I get really in my own head when I'm thinking about who I'm going to send it out to. And one of the things that really helped with this last draft is I was just like, fuck it. I just want to write it this way in my voice. And like, I think that's always my biggest issue. Like the only time writing isn't fun for me is when I'm thinking about how am I going to sell this shit? But if I can like forget about that and just be like totally in the moment and doing what I'm doing and like, you know, I think in the back of my head, I'm always like, I would love if someone would publish this thing that I'm working forever on. Right. But if I cannot think about that for as long as possible, then writing is super fun.
Oh, that's so smart. Yeah, I think that's part of it is like, I know I'm getting ready to send it to other people. So I am like thinking about like, when are they going to think about this? Or what if they, you know, whatever.
Totally.
Okay. This is not therapy. Is the other novel that you're working on close to fruition?
I think so. I haven't looked at it since December 31st. And so I hope so. It felt I had swapped, that was a deadline I had with another writer. We swapped novels like that day, I think December 30th or December 31st. And yeah, it felt like it was pretty close to being done. I think because I wrote that from beginning to end without sharing it with anyone until I had 2 drafts, which was very different than writing a book while you're in grad school where you have to like turn in chunks.
Right.
I'll never do that again. I don't like having other people's voices in my head when I write. I feel like I was like resolving problems in this book before I had gotten to the end. Whereas with the second book around one, like I like to think maybe I know a little bit more what I'm doing, though it all still sort of feels elusive. But yeah, I didn't share even a page with anyone for the first two drafts. And so I feel like I was able to resolve a lot more problems on my own in my own voice. So now I'm sure there's a whole list of other problems, but at least the plot is solid, which was not the case the first time around with my current book.
Oh, that's really interesting. What have you learned about your writing process while working on this project?
I mean, I think definitely that I'm a person who has to do it most days a week. If I get too far away from it, it ends up feeling really scary to me. But if I can do, even just 30 minutes a day, but ideally an hour a day, 5 or 6 days a week, then it doesn't become something bigger than it is. So I do like to have I'm pretty strict with myself about daily practice, but also the fun element. I have to really work super hard not to think about other people while I'm in draft mode. I definitely have like people I am writing to, like people who I'm like, oh, I can't wait for them to read this and like they're going to laugh at this joke or whatever. And that really helps me with voice stuff. But in terms of like publishing, I have to really not think at all about what's going to happen next. Otherwise it becomes just unbearable, like not fun. And I write because I think it is a super enjoyable activity and I don't want to like corrupt it.
Totally. Here's Shelby reading an excerpt from her work in progress, Howling Women.
So this is just from sort of towards the beginning of the book. When I enrolled in college, I hadn't known what exactly I'd major in. I was the first in my family to go to college. I had only vague notions of what one might do with a college degree based off books and movies I'd seen that had informed my imagination. In my imagination, the humanities were always appealing. I liked the idea of collecting knowledge, as if reading and retaining information could somehow elevate a person to goodness, even if that knowledge didn't exactly translate to a specific job. It was all abstract, a fantasy. But I think maybe if you are a person who grows up in a shitty home with violence and unspoken agreements not to address reality, then fantasy is just as real as anything else. I liked the classes that felt worldly and cultured: art, English, critical theory. And so I stumbled into an educational smorgasbord of sorts. I loved college, the professors, the readings, the way 5-syllable words rolled easily off tongues in class discussion, methodology, normativity, disillusionment, ontological. I loved learning about things my mother had never heard of, as though that in and of itself was enough to guarantee my life would turn out better than hers. California, college, they were both part of a series of steps to ensure I didn't end up as some stereotype. You know the sort. Poor white trash with a pedophile stepfather and a drunk mother grows up to be a teen mom shopping at Walmart and eating boxed mac and cheese. It was judgy, sure, but it's my past, so I'm allowed to be a judgy bitch. I didn't want to be that girl. I wanted to exceed others' expectations of me. I saw the way other moms looked at my mom when she made the occasional pop into parents' night in her too tight tank top, 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag, reeking of boxed wine and cigarettes. I didn't want anyone to look at me like that ever. It's embarrassing to admit the size of this chip on my shoulder that I'd been carrying. I know I must sound naive too, which is doubly embarrassing considering all those years in college I spent nurturing my intellect. I feel like I got it all wrong, even while I was in classes, reading difficult books and regurgitating words I didn't totally understand. I was still working as a waitress and drinking most nights and hooking up with men that weren't all that different from the types of men my mom dated. Maybe that's the problem. I was hoping one thing, a degree, would magically change the behaviors that were practically ingrained in my DNA. What an idiot.
Ooh, I can't wait to read it. On that note, what is your all-time favorite piece of your own writing?
Oh, whoa. Okay. I feel like I heard you ask someone else this question. I can't believe I didn't think about
This is one of my regulars.
I like a lot of stuff that hasn't published yet, but I think my favorite piece that's out, and just because it's been really cool, the people that I've made connections with over it, is If God Is My Drug, Can I Still Claim Sobriety? And it's just about, like substance abuse and spirituality. But it's led to some really cool conversations with people I didn't know that well until after they'd read it. And that was a really awesome experience.
Oh, cool. Okay, so we both interview writers. We've interviewed some of the same writers. Tell listeners a little bit about that. And then I'd also love to know, because I've learned so much just in all the interviews that I've done so far. What are some of your favorite takeaways from the writers you've interviewed?
Yeah. Okay. So that's maybe one of my favorite things that I do is interviewing other writers. And it kind of started in this weird way. I started for Write or Die Tribe. I had a friend who published a chat book, and I was like, man, no one's reading your sick ass chat book. Let me see if like Kaylee at Write or Die Tribe will take an interview with you. And so I did it just like not knowing that there was like a whole culture and like, like there's like a system, like this is a thing. Right. And so, yeah, I just interviewed my friend, and then I think that was at the end of the year. And then my husband was like, you really we got to cut down our expenses. And I was buying a lot of books. And I was like, man, what if I request books in exchange for interviews? Like not knowing that's a normal thing. But so I started reaching out to indie authors whose books I really wanted to read. And I was like, hey, I'll review your book if you send this to me. And then I was just like obsessed. And then people started hitting me up and were like, oh, can I send you my book? And because I just do it sort of freelance for different magazines, I get to be really choosy. So it's really like I mostly only interview authors who I already know their work and think it's cool, or read something and really want to know what their book is about. Mm-hmm. And so it's so fun. I definitely had a lot of learning curves because I was like a total amateur. I got into it sort of for free books and then realized, oh, this is
love that.
like a way bigger, community experience. But I think community is probably a big thing I took away from it. Interviewing other writers has led me to have some really cool relationships with people. And some of those have become my writing partners, people I exchange work with. And then obviously some are not people I keep in contact with. They're just yeah, sure, I'll interview with you for some small magazine. But then the other takeaway, I think, and this is maybe from Elizabeth Ellen and Mick Grantham, who also both run small presses and are just kind of badasses, but they've been really inspiring in their sort of DIY aesthetic. They're yeah, just do whatever you want. Just do it. And I have their voices in my head all the time when I'm thinking about oh, should I put this on a blog? Should I try this writing activity? Should I send this workout? Should I? And I have a couple other projects I'm kind of growing on the side that's been inspired by them, and they're sort of just do it mentality. Mick Grantham said what's the worst that can happen? You'll lose a little bit of money, but you were already broke anyway, and at least there's cool art that comes out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really inspiring to me.
Elizabeth Ellen keeps coming up. I have to have her on the fucking podcast because everyone is just she's amazing.
Yeah, she's great.
Okay. So you also teach workshops. Plug your upcoming workshops and let us know what's going on in that arena.
Cool. Yeah. So I teach a process class at the Berkeley Writing Salon that's all about establishing a daily practice. And I'm doing a version of that for Write or Die Tribe in September that is a little bit more about ritual. It's called Writing as Ritual, and it's a 4-week course where the objective is that writers come out with meaningful practices around their writing and also a strong schedule that they feel they can really adhere to. And then I'm teaching a workshop. It's the first workshop I've taught in a long time, actually. It's just a fiction workshop, but it's a hybrid. So it's part generative and then part given feedback. And that is at the Berkeley Writing Salon, but it's all virtual. So even if you're not in California.
Oh, nice.
And also there I'm teaching just a couple sort of generative classes where, I give a lot of prompts and a lot of readings, and we do a lot of in-class writing, and I send you with exercises to go and, hopefully continue daily writing outside of class.
Ooh, I'm going to have to check some of those out. Nice. And you're very active at Write or Die Tribe. Are you one of the main, I don't know totally how that's set up.
I have actually taken kind of a step back from turning in work for Kaylee, who runs Write or Die Tribe, and she's so amazing. I love working with her, and she's really open. I've come to her with lots of ideas, and she's always just yeah, do it. And I don't even know how she finds the time to run that site. She's really impressive. But no, I do a lot of interviews there, and then I just am now teaching the class there, but I don't write a ton for them anymore, other than interviews and then this seminar that I'm leading.
I think it's your interviews. That's why I'm always oh, she's like one of the main people there.
Yeah, I think last year I was doing a lot of interviews for Write or Die Tribe, but I've had to slow it down a little bit because there's just a lot with, work and stuff.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let listeners know how they can connect with you online and your social media, stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm on, the socials. I take a lot of breaks from them. So I'm always best by email, but I'm on Twitter and Instagram. My handle's the same at both. It's just at Shelby Hinte, my name. And then my work is just on my website, links to it anyway.
Okay, so this is the second Prompt Me Daddy. I'm very excited. So talk us through one of your favorite writing exercises or a prompt or whatever you want to do.
I love this idea of Prompt Me Daddy. I just have to say, I think it's so cute. But so I was thinking, so when I do prompts, I tend to change my curriculum based on a lot of what I'm reading. And I always like to bring in a lot of independent literature, and I share a lot of stuff from like blogs and online magazines. And this meetup that I just led a couple months ago, I was reading XO by Sarah Rausch. It's out from Autofocus, which is a small press. I think it was the second book they published, but there was this section that she wrote, and this is a book about an infidelity of hers. And I was so drawn to this. And so I brought it to a workshop. It's a little paragraph. And I read this to the students. And it just says, in classic story structure, Freytag's pyramid, there is an inciting incident that kicks off the narrative. We see this also in the hero's journey, the call to adventure. When we tell a story, we choose this inciting incident. In life, the beginning is often obscured. Was hello our inciting incident? The kiss, the chase connection in an unexpected city, the eye contact across the crowded room that morning? Or was it now when I plugged into that what was terrifying? And it goes on, but essentially it's her looking for, like, what was the start of this affair? And so I had students make a list of, 5 to 10 major events in their life or a character's life from a project they were working on. And then they chose one of those events, and they had to write in 5 sentences the story of that event. And then they had 20 minutes to do that. And then we moved on, and they had to write the story of that event, but from a different starting point. So they could go forward in time or back in time, but it had to be the same story told from 2 different starting points. And that got a lot of really cool material that came up from that.
I love that. And I also like that she was like playing with that starting point in her work as well. Like she left it in.
Yeah, love it.
And I also read and recommend you have a thing on Write or Die Tribe that's creative exercises to reimagine revision, which spoke to me. So thank you so much. I will be using your revision exercise as I happen in this rewrite, and it was so fun to get to know you.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you so much for thinking of me. It was so fun, like meeting you in Chloe's class and talking on your podcast. I really like the podcast. I've been listening to it.
Thank you so much to Shelby. That is it for this edition of The Bleeders. You have all been officially prompted by today's daddy, Shelby Hinte. So go forth and write your inciting incidents wherever they start, you dirty little word sluts. And if you missed the last episode with Omar Malalam, all about his writing and publishing process for his travel memoir, Praying to the West, make sure you go back and check it out. Here is a little preview of that conversation.
Now, when I really started to become a character in my own book with kind of an arc that I was setting out to, explore, it was one of my earlier trips. I went to Trinidad, and I kept being greeted and treated like a Muslim brother and kind of expected to pray with people. And I found that people were opening up to me because they thought I was, a pious Muslim person, and not necessarily as like a journalist, more like just like a curious brother. And I felt very conflicted about that. After that, I felt like I really need to be a lot more transparent with my subjects, but I especially needed to be more transparent with my readers.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Bleeders. Writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak, and hey, let's connect on social media. I am at Courtney Kosak, Kocak, on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack. The link is in the episode description. And join me again in 2 weeks for another episode. In the meantime, happy bleeding.